The Cold War began heating up again, as the US, USSR and France all initiated nuclear bomb test programs, while the Israeli Air Force continued heavily bombing Beirut. In America, the inventor of the cathode ray tube, Russian-born Vladimir K. Zworykin, died on his 94th birthday. And as Irene Cara's fame gave way to Dexy's Midnight Runner's Come On Eileen at the top of the British charts, and The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas knocked E.T. off the top of the US box office charts for all of a week, the F1 teams had a breather before another doubleheader of races in West Germany and Austria. Nigel Mansell returned once again, this time with the doctors more confident that his arm was properly healed, though he was still in some pain from it, and there were two new faces in the paddock. Jochen Mass was still recovering from his nightmare shunt in France. He gave it a spin in practice despite cracked ribs, but thought better of it, and would be replaced at March by Rupert Keegan, while at Theodore, Jan Lammers was replaced by hotly tipped Irish teenager Tommy Byrne. Son of Maverick pilot and airline owner Mike Keegan, young Rupert was never short on a bit of cash growing up, and in 1973 he began racing in Ford Escorts in Mexico and won his first race the following year. Bankrolled by his father into Formula 3, he developed a reputation for being talented but hot-headed, and with a playboy attitude not unlike the higher-profile and more talented James Hunt. Like Hunt, he moved into F1 with the Hesketh team, who seemed a good fit but were on the decline by 1977, and not much came of it, nor his 1978 season with Surtees. Keegan moved into the Aurora AFX series, which he won in 1979, before attempting an F1 comeback in a customer Williams run by the RAM management team. No points and 3 DNQs from 7 entries, but he was kept in mind by RAM when a new March driver was needed at Hockenheim. Tommy Byrne from Drogheda in Ireland was one of the coming men of racing, despite a youth blighted by sectarian divisions and delinquency. Once behind a wheel, Byrne was simply stunning. He seemed to be able to beat anyone in anything, and had been noticed during the F3 support races at Brands Hatch by Teddy Yip's Irish business partner Sid Taylor. Keen for more Irish involvement in Formula 1, and unimpressed with Jan Lammers' performances, Taylor persuaded Yip to offer Byrne a seat for the balance of the 1982 season, despite the team management's reported concern for his lack of experience. Like Paul Ricard, Hockenheim was a turbo paradise, and few people saw much of a chance of a normally aspirated winner here. And sure enough, Pironi topped Friday's timing sheets, followed by Prost, Arnoux, Piquet, Tombe and Patrese, with Alboreto, the top Atmo car, almost 5 seconds adrift. Niki Lauda had set the 8th fastest time, but had an off and had hurt his wrist, so withdrew from the event. It rained heavily on Saturday, which meant that Friday's times would determine the grid, and with Lauda's withdrawal, De Cesaris took over 8th with Rosberg and Watson behind on row 5. The Ligiers were having a better weekend so far, with Cheever 12th and Lafitte 15th, split by De Angelis and Warwick, while Daly could only manage 19th in the second Williams after having to use the spare for most of Friday's session. Mansell was 18th on his Lotus return, while Mark Sierra would only start the race thanks to Lauda's withdrawal, maintaining his 100% record in 1982 by the skin of his teeth. Despite the wet weather on Saturday, some drivers went out to have a test run in the conditions. Didier Pironi, thundering through the spray, came upon Derek Daly's Williams, which moved over to the right. Thinking Daly was moving over to let him through, Pironi shot past, straight into the back of Alain Prost's slow-moving Renault, which Daly had been overtaking. In what looked sickeningly reminiscent of Gilles Villeneuve's accident back in May, the Ferrari was launched through the air, cartwheeled and disintegrated as it landed. Piquet and Cheever, arriving next on the scene, pulled over and helped Prost from his cockpit, but Pironi was firmly stuck. It took the rescue services over half an hour to cut the Frenchman free, and he was airlifted to hospital in Heidelberg with 2 shattered legs and severe foot injuries. By the morning of the race, the paddock was relieved to hear that Pironi's life was not in danger, though whether he would walk again, let alone drive a racing car, was very much still in the balance. Thinking tactically, one might say cynically, the Ferrari team opted not to officially withdraw Pironi's entry, which would have moved Tombe over to the less advantageous right-hand side of the grid, meaning that the pole position slot would be empty, 25 cars would start, and poor Tommy Byrne would have to wait for his F1 debut. The morning warm-up saw Piquet and race trim blow everyone else into the weeds, and as the cars assembled for the grid, there were other problems. Rosberg found that he had a misfire on his way round to the grid, so he hopped in the spare, while Watson was having an electrical gremlin and the McLaren team turned off everything except the ignition. He would be racing without instruments. The weather was dry, but a sticky atmosphere and looming clouds suggested this would not last long, and there was a general air of gloom over the track as the cars lined up. Mauro Baldi's arrows wouldn't start, so he sprinted across and hopped in the spare and would start from the pit lane. Making the most of the hole in front of him, Arnoux got the drop on Prost and went into the first corner in the lead. And as they reached the first chicane, tightened up a bit since last year, Piquet snuck past Alain too to take second. Tombe was up to fourth, then De Cesaris, Alboreto, Cheever and Patrese, who'd bogged down at the start and lost ground. Patrese made it up to sixth by the end of lap 1, and as the leaders headed into the second lap, Piquet pulled out to take the lead from Arnoux at the first chicane. Once again, it was expected that Brabham were trying a pit stop tactic, and certainly Piquet was clearly much quicker than Arnoux and soon pulled out a lead. Cheever's good start was all for nothing as one of his skirts was damaged and he had to come in for a new one. On the next lap, De Angelis was in for the same reason, while the sole German driver in the race, Manfred Winkelhock, came in to retire his German car with a spot of German gearbox trouble. Prost's Renault had been having engine trouble in the morning warm-up, and it was starting to sound rough already, as Tombe came past for third and Patrese caught up to the leading group. Meanwhile, Piquet was charging, breezing past backmarkers already and still pulling out a lead over Arnoux, now up to 16 seconds. Watson and De Cesaris tangled over 6th on lap 9, and the Italian had to bring his Alfa in for a new skirt, only to find his oil cooler was also ruptured and he retired. Tombe moved past Arnoux into second, and a lap later Prost came in, his engine still not right. It was a broken injection pipe and he lost 5 laps getting it fixed. While he was there, Patrese pulled in to expire in yet another cloud of expensive BMW smoke. All of which left Watson now in 4th, with Rosberg 5th and Alboreto 6th. Good news for Watson's championship hopes, with Pironi now presumably out of the running for the rest of the year. Piquet continued to stretch his lead over Tombe to 24 seconds at the end of lap 17, but then it all went sideways, literally, for the defending champion. So while the viewing public would have to wait yet longer to see the fabled Brabham pit stop, Patrick Tombe now led the race with just over half distance to go, with Arnoux second, Watson third, Rosberg 4th, Alboreto 5th and Lafitte now 6th. Tombe looked calm and collected and seemed to be having no trouble staying ahead of Arnoux and slowly pulling out, so it seemed like it would come down to reliability. Lafitte, meanwhile, seemed to be having a good day for a change, and passed Alboreto before coming up on Rosberg, still not entirely happy in the T-car. With the camera still looking elsewhere, the Ligier got past the Williams and began to draw slowly ahead. Soon he came up to lap Mansell, still battling gamely with a sore wrist, and passed him on the pit straight, only to go into the first corner a bit fast, slide, and end up bouncing along the grass and watching Rosberg and Alboreto go sailing past. In fact, the Ligier's side skirts had also been damaged and Lafitte began to struggle badly with the lack of downforce, before coming in on lap 37 for new skirts, only to find that the team had no more material available and he retired. On the same lap with 8 to go, John Watson had a suspension failure at high speed, sending him slithering into retirement, but fortunately unhurt. So now Tombe led Arnoux, then Rosberg, Alboreto, Giacomelli and Sura. With the cars spread out and Tombe driving a smooth, safe race, there was nothing much left to talk about for the last few laps. They were doubtless some of the longest laps of Tombe's life, but when they were over, he had won his maiden Grand Prix in just his 4th race for Ferrari to move the prancing horse to the top of the constructors' standings. Arnoux was second, and the only driver unlapped by Tombe, and Rosberg was third with Alboreto, Giacomelli and Sura holding their positions. Bruno's first points of the year, and a great performance from Marc after starting the race dead last. With 4 races to go, both championships were still wide open, with the maximum available points, 36 for the drivers, 60 for the constructors, covering the entire span of the table. Everyone who had scored points so far still stood a mathematical chance of winning the title. There was a lot to talk about as the teams packed up and headed for the Alpine foothills.